Hello everyone and welcome to another Directions Mag Geospatial webinar, today sponsored by our friends at Census Technologies. We encourage you to stop by directionsmag.com for geospatial news, articles, podcasts, and of course more webinars. We are excited to have Kyle back with us today to talk about fixed wing payloads and give us some great demonstrations and help us be more successful with our UAVs. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, we did one of these webinars with Directions Mag probably about a month or two ago, and it was, I think 20 minutes. Certainly, you can do a lot in 20 minutes, but there's certainly stuff that's not going to get covered that you might have questions on. So we can definitely follow up with some of that material after the fact. So feel free to either shoot the questions during the webinar or hit us up after. So yeah, we'll get rolling. Last webinar was pertaining to 107 waivers and mapping, how to leverage both high altitude and BB loss waivers in a mapping application. Today we're going to focus more on the payload side of things. One thing that we like to talk about at Census is, you choose a VTOL fixed wing or you choose a drone. Really, that's the kind of the last step. You work backwards from a data product that's required, a deliverable, into a payload that can achieve that deliverable, and then basically what can haul it the most efficiently. That's kind of where the drone comes in. As a manufacturer of the aircraft, working backwards from the data, we're going to go into a lot of payloads today, and the reason we have so many payload offerings is because we have that philosophy of data first, drone second. On this slide here is both industry-wide standard payloads as well as census-wide standard payloads. So working at the top, you have all your optical imagers between the Sony cameras and the Phase 1 IXM 100. So representative just in megapixels between 24 megapixels to 100 megapixels, with 42 and 61 being right in the middle. So A7R3, A7R4, Phase 1 camera, and the Sony A6400. All of those are standard integrations for us. A7R3 probably more than anything, but the Phase 1 has a significant use case in utility applications and different mapping applications where coverage and GSD are, of the most paramount need. Bottom left is our gimbal DOIR camera. It is a 20x optical zoom with a 640 by 480 thermal sensor. This payload here is used in a lot of different utility applications, believe it or not. It's not just surveillance and reconnaissance, but in a lot of different utility applications or storm response. We're live streaming both from the drone to the ground control station and from the ground control station to an EOC somewhere. The gimbal camera is definitely one that we do a lot of work with. So in the middle on the bottom, the Workswell Wireless Pro. This was our replacement to the Duo Pro R. Is a radiometric thermal camera, 640 by 512. This has a lot of utility in solar farm inspections. There's big enterprise companies that are leveraging information coming off the Wireless Pro to generate work orders based off faulty cells, so they can send technicians out from the drone data. Those work orders are being generated via an algorithm. So autonomously generated work orders based off radiometric thermal data over the solar farms. We have customers using it for groundwater and pipeline inspection, but the first one that comes to mind is solar. Bottom right, there's probably a significant amount of folks on this webinar that are familiar with MicaSense in general. We've been an integrator of the MicaSense Red Edge for a while. On this picture is one of the later MicaSense Red Edge cameras, the MicaSense Red Edge MX. I believe the MX is end of life sometime in the next year or so. You guys can feel free to hit me on the chat that I'm wrong about that, but I saw something pertaining to it. So one of the things that Census is integrating, as well as I'm sure many others that have been integrating the MicaSense line for a while, is the MicaSense Ultim PT. So getting both the thermal band and the panchromatic band. Going into some more detail on some of the optical imagers. So these stats are specific to our system, but if you look at things like the altitude, the flying speed, obviously anybody can integrate the cameras to a degree. Some of these are tougher integrations than others. The optical imagers are pretty easy, but We fly at about 40 miles an hour. We typically recommend an overlap and a side lap of 70% on both. We give a range of, between X% and X%, but 70-70 is a very typical recommendation from us. It accounts for basically changing winds in both velocity and direction, but it also makes sure there's going to be no holes in the data. And since we fly for so long and carry big enough cameras, we fly at 390. And we also we constrain these types of payload conversations to just what can you do in an hour. So the aircraft flies for an hour and a half, but to keep a constant across the board to get a better idea of both coverage and ground sampling distance, we keep altitude, flying speed, overlap, and flight time the same. So with a very narrow lens like the Phase 1 IXM 80 millimeter, obviously your GSD is sub centimeter to 0.68 centimeters per pixel. Your coverage is 174. So that's what you get in an hour. It's what you gain in GSD, you lose in coverage. But you're also getting pretty significantly narrow field of view on the 80 millimeter. So a little bit similar story on the A7R3 55. Big difference obviously between the Phase 1 and the Sony line is price point. You pay for those megapixels that you get with the Phase 1 camera. Your GSD with the Sony A7R3 is still sub centimeter, but not by much, 0.98. Coverage is about the same, and everything else is a constant as well. So most projects don't require something sub centimeter. If they don't, and coverage matters more, that A7R3 with a 28 millimeter lens is a great option. You have a GSD just about 2 centimeters, and your coverage goes way up. Again, that's 408 acres per hour. Roughly times that by 0.5, you're getting about 600 acres per flight. You can reasonably anticipate on a good weather day 4 or 5 flights a day. So several thousand acres a day worth of mapping with the A7R3. Going into some of the multispectral and hyperspectral offerings, again, industry-wide, I don't want to hijack this webinar and make it more about Census than it is about information. Plenty of folks integrate these, but the MicaSense Red Edge MX and the MicaSense Altum PT, whether that be for worm identification, pest identification in a field, where to apply insecticide, where to apply additional water, it's all revolving around increasing yield and smart farming. So agriculture is one of those use cases that it's always projected to be at the top of the UAS use case market. It's catching up. I think that energy has dominated that for a while, but with all the land and specialty crops and corn and soybean in the world, specifically to just the U.S., if you look at an entity like Cargill, it buys 600,000 acres worth of canola a year. Efficiency matters, and that's where sensors like these really, really stand out. So I talked a little bit about the solar example with the Workswell Wireless Pro. Again, this for us was a replacement to the Duo Pro R. It is able to keep up with us at 40 to 45 miles an hour better than the Duo Pro R was. It does have a live streaming option, the Wireless Pro. This is a solar example. It's actually a roof that has a few solar panels on top of it. When you're able to layer the Wireless Pro data sets with their Core Player software suite, you're actually able to make the most of that radiometric thermal data. So definitely it was a great integration for us, and it's something that we anticipate, especially as renewables becomes higher and higher priority. In the utility world, at least, we'll be spending a lot more time with this Wireless Pro. Here's the gimbal DOIR camera to give you an idea of what a 20x optical zoom looks like at 45 miles an hour on our system. This is a pretty tight angle, a pretty tight view of a golf course here in town, actually, Cypress Head Golf Course. One thing you'll notice is the target tracking. To enable that target tracking, you just click on the target. And you're clicking on a lat long. So the thing that's really makes this camera beneficial is all of the metadata embedded in this video. I'm not target tracking on pixels. I'm target tracking on a projected lat long to become the center frame of the image, and it all stabilizes around that. So you look at a slant range of over 500 meters away. You have battery voltage, field of view, distance from GCS, and altitude on there as well. And you can obviously take snapshots throughout that live video as well. What's next? So I've talked about a good amount of different sensors and imagers on this brief webinar so far. But what is specifically the industry doing next, and what is Census doing next? Obviously, we pay for these webinars, so I do want to talk about what Census is doing next. These are all 2022 items, some higher priority than others. A LiDAR integration is a goal that we have to have commercialized by the end of the second quarter. We are in the process of an integration at the moment. We hope to be announcing that integration at AUVSI here in a couple of weeks. It is derived from requirements that have been handed to us by a couple of legacy customers. We anticipate both the accuracies and densities to meet a threshold that's extremely usable. There's not a ton I can say until we're deeper into the integration, because I don't want to provide any sort of false promises, but everything's checking out on paper in terms of the heights that we intend to fly and the cruise speeds that we intend to fly and the accuracies and densities that are required. So LiDAR is the very next one on our list. And again, we plan to have QA and QC reports ready for review and data sets ready for review by the end of the second quarter. So roughly 2.5 months. Optical gas imagers is something that the sensing and data team at Census, the Novel Tech Development Group, has been working on for the last few months. It is fully operational on a multi-rotor at the moment. We'll get into the Centero Universal Payload System here in a couple of slides, but the laser spectrometer and optical gas imaging camera stacked together for methane detection is one of the very, very next ones after the LiDAR. Again, it already is working and operational, but we want to squeeze that sensor suite into a Centero Universal System so it can be flown on a BVLOS fixed wing. Stereoscopic imaging, basically real-time photogrammetry. We anticipate this technology to play a large use in vegetation management, line sag, it's real-time measurements basically, and a magnetometer as well. So with different statewide initiatives and federally funded initiatives pertaining to magnetometry surveys, where the fidelity of the information required kind of is most benefited from a drone rather than a manned aircraft, even though you're talking about tens of millions of acres worth of survey work that's required. The fidelity kind of needs to be flown lower, but it also can't be flown on a Phantom 4 RTK, for example, just for efficiency's sake. When you're talking about 10 million acres with a Phantom 4, you'll be doing it a while. So that's where Census is looking at integrating a magnetometer on board the Centero BVLOS to play a role in some of those projects where it makes sense, both short-term and long-term. So here's the payload suite. This is actually in our old hangar a few years ago, but you look at these payloads, they're all integrated in a universal payload box. So if you were to purchase a Centero aircraft, you have the ability to plug and play all of our payload offerings because they're all in a payload box like this, including the LiDAR that will be integrated soon. We will be able to get that LiDAR in this universal box. So if you need to do photogrammetry one day and LiDAR the next, or photogrammetry in 1 hour and an hour later you need to do a LiDAR flight, swap the box. It takes 30 seconds. So everything's toolless and is extremely easy to assemble because all you're doing is undoing those 4 thumb screws and sliding this whole installation into the fuselage payload bay, and it receives its power and triggering from that pinout on the bottom. So if you spin around to the front of this payload box, you see the 4 thumb screws. That is underneath the aircraft. You can see it's recessed into the box a tiny bit so that when we do land vertically on our belly, we are raised up a couple of inches above the ground to keep the lens free and clear of dust, debris, dirt, sticks, twigs, rocks, etc. So those 4 thumb screws attach into the plane, and undoing them, the whole box slides out, you pop a new one in. So that is the Centero Universal Payload System I've referenced. And the one thing I wanted to hit at the end here on this last couple of slides is that modularity is extremely critical when looking at VTOL fixed wings. These systems can be 5,000, they can be 50,000, they can be 150,000. Chances are that a lot of folks on this webinar don't do the same type of work every single day, or if they do, they might be expanding into new verticals. Well, it's important to keep modularity in the front of the mind, especially as it pertains to payloads, because that's your moneymaker. The drone is just a tool to acquire data. So any questions, feel free to hit me. One of the things obviously we didn't have time to dive into data sets. hit me after if you want to see them. With the last minute or so of the webinar, I wanted to do a quick flight planning demo. It takes about 30 seconds. And also mention that we are about to kick off about 9,000 miles worth of demos. Middle of May to middle of July, I have 2 teams, one going on the east, one going on the west of the United States, each team covering about 4,000 miles. So chances are we're coming to a city near you in the next month. So here's a quick demo of how to flight plan, how to incorporate VTOL fixed wing mapping into your workflow. Again, this is specific to Census, but if I wanted to map this area, I'm just going to make a random area, polygon, auto waypoints. Here's my grid. It made it for it. It gives me all the stats. So 261 acres. I got to change my flying speed to 45. I pick my camera. These are all my payload options. So if I click the phase 1 camera, obviously it gets significantly tighter because I think I use an 85 millimeter lens on here and it's 260 acres. Change stats at 35 millimeter lens. So if I change stats about my camera, it gives me my GSD. It gives me, I get to tweak things like my overshoot and lead in. But more importantly, I'm going to keep these parameters. These are what I can easily change. So if I want to fly higher, jack that up. If I want to fly slower, slow that down. And then right before you accept the mission, you get a quick peek at this and make sure that your flying time is within the envelope of the aircraft that you're flying. Obviously, 21 minutes with an hour-and-a-half endurance is well within. Here's my acreage. Here's my photos, and accept. So that's making a flight plan, at least for our system. You have all the ability to choose payloads before and kind of rock and roll from there.
Well, thanks, Kyle. Such great information and cool tools.
Yeah, I think that was it. Yep. So again, if you want to see data sets, if you want to see us on the Centero tour, again, we will be probably coming to a city near you, just given the stops. We're doing about 16 different states for each trip, a west and an east. The trip's about 8 weeks long and about 4,000 miles. So we have published that route on our company LinkedIn, Dylan Busby specifically on our company LinkedIn. So reach out, we'll shoot you the dates and times and locations for these demo stops. We'll be demoing a few different payloads. Obviously, we'll be demoing the Centero BB-LOS. Feel free to hit us up and we'd love to have you out.
That's great. Thanks again to Kyle for sharing his expertise. A shout out to Adam as well. He's in the background helping us out with logistics also. And hope that you join us for another webinar soon. Tell a friend about Census Technologies and Directions Magazine. Thanks, everybody.